I play your indie games on itch. Coming up.
I fall off a ledge. I talk to some bugs. I avoid spikes and control gravity. And I shoot a lot of people in a garden.
I'm Xanderwood. I make indie games and tutorials on game development. I also play your indie games every week on my channel. Make sure you subscribe and click that bell icon so you never miss a video.
And a huge shout out to my new channel members and Patreon supporters: Jet Simon, Basic Terror, Enmark Games, Zan, Foozle CC, James Welsh, Olivia Bernier, Tor Alexanderson, Matt, Fan, Mari Lewis, Seth Coble, and Retro Galaxy. Chaos is a game that's title isn't so much a title as it is a description for the game itself. It's a parkour style speedrunner, but you have no control over the player. You run in the direction you're facing and can only jump and hope that your next jump doesn't miss the platform, causing you to have to restart the level again and again. I like the cartoony style graphics of the game and the sassy HUD and UI elements, but on the whole it was just platforms in a void. I'd add some background elements which would give the game some more depth, giving the player a more grounded place in the world. Unfortunately, there's no sound in this game or sound effects, so there's nothing more I can say here. The control of the player is by far the most problematic issue with the game. I found it so difficult to land my jumps and progress through the level. If the game is taking my ability to control movement away, other than jump, it should give me back something in return. Give me the ability to slow down time for a brief moment, for example, or tie this into collecting coins, or something making a skillful run more important to future progression. There needs to be a trade-off, in my opinion, or the game will just feel unfair. It's okay. If it was a colour, it'd be beige. I liked the premise, but the controls were pretty darn near impossible to control, and my entire time with the game was spent on the first level, failing over and over, being told I sucked by the lose screen. The difficulty curve is definitely where the attention needs to be on this game. If I can't beat the first level after 20 plus attempts, I'm not going to be compelled to continue trying when things get tougher down the line. You're an insect travelling from your home valley to reach the palace hive of Queen Waspra, who plans on invading the valley and eliminating all who oppose her, including you. The graphics are simple yet charming. I like the little two-frame animations on the characters. Everything else is pretty basic, but the story does a nice job of keeping your attention. The game music is on a loop, but the music isn't a loopable track, so it's very noticeable when the music comes to an end and there is an awkward silence before the song starts again. The game could definitely use some sound effects. I'd switch up the music based on who you're interacting with. When talking to evil or bad characters, you could add a more sinister soundtrack. I love how your first interaction sets the premise of the story. You outline a specific problem, and that sets the tone for the game really well. There are unfortunately a number of bugs that break the game, making you have to restart. The player character moves on a grid, which is fine, but the NPCs aren't aligned to that grid, so interacting with them looks and feels a little odd. When you press I to open the inventory, there is no way to close it without restarting. It's a cute little RPG game with a promise to be much more. My advice would be to keep the story simple, as an in-depth adventure could get very difficult to manage as the game gets bigger and bigger. There are a few issues that need addressing, such as the speed of the text. Give the player control over when to progress the conversation. People tend to read at different speeds, and me especially. I'm awfully slow, and oftentimes the conversation would move on before I'd finish reading. The controls are simple, but I'm not sure a grid works for the gameplay. I kinda wanted to have free roaming to explore wherever I like. Also, at the end of the first layout, it seems like the NPC gave me something, an item, but I wasn't sure what it was. And when I checked my inventory, I got frozen on the inventory screen. Hopefully the feedback was useful to you. I don't like to be overly critical, but I feel there is a few fundamental issues with the game that need addressing before development continues. Before we continue with the video, I'd like to take a moment to remind you that if you're enjoying the channel and the content and want more Xanderwood in your life, you can check out my store, xanderwood.com, for my exclusive merch range. Also, don't forget Xanther Jam 6 is available on itch right now, so get yourself enrolled and you may have your entry played on my channel after the jam ends. Lastly, if you want exclusive content, music and game assets, you can join the Xanderwood family by becoming a channel member or supporting my work on Patreon. Links to everything are in the description. Now on with the video. Gravity Swap by Ellis James 20061 is a precision platformer where you need to guide your little square to the safe haven that is the end of the level, dodging spikes, rotating platforms, and other enemies. Be careful though, as one false step can be the difference between a successful run and utter failure. I'm not a massive fan of large blocks of text on screen. And at the start of the game, you have two very protrusive hints pulsing on a sine wave, giving you instructions. This would have worked a lot better as a tutorial level, where you get basic instructions fed to you as you play. I did like the attention to detail with the player sprite. The way it pulses up and down as you play really adds polish to the game. The particles that project out from the player when you jump are a nice addition. They really complement the style of the game well. The game really reminds me of Icoso's game, Minima, or arguably the better sequel, Minima 2. From the opening screen, the music is inconsistent. You need to have music for each screen. Silence on the level select screen, and how to play screens, break up the flow of the game. The music was wonderfully retro at first, but got a little repetitive after a while. I would have a new, short chiptune track for each level of the game. I did like the sound effects in the game, but add in some pitch variation on the jumping to keep it from getting monotonous. The controls felt tight and juicy. I really liked the screen shake and sound effects. I also really like how the screen turns red when you die. I kept dying, so having a button to allow me to restart rather than having to use the mouse each time would have been more convenient. I did like the addition of the new enemies as you progress. This helped to keep the game interesting. I'm not sure wall jumping was a necessary mechanic. If I can switch gravity whenever I like, it kinda made the wall jumping redundant. I would add a timer to each level. I feel that the tone of the game was rewarding the player for precision, bordering on a rage game at times, so a level timer felt like a natural next step. If you had a level timer, you could reward the player with a higher score for faster level completion, and who knows, maybe an entire speedrun mode. It's a well-made game, but in truth, I feel there needs to be more to keep the player coming back. Some of the jumps can be a little unforgiving, and I didn't really get a sense of progression or reward for completing levels, so there wasn't much incentive to play the next level. You have the basis of a really nice game with tight controls and sounds, but your focus needs to be on why should the player come back and try this game again. Return to Sender by Craykane is a very well-made game with a very interesting concept. The game is predominantly a two-player game, where, in Tetris-style head-to-head, you send your opponent more enemies based on how many enemies you can kill. As I don't have friends, however, I played the one-player mode, where enemies spawn in waves, and you have to disperse them, earning money and upgrading your weapons, so you can survive the next round. The graphics were good, I can't lie. It really made me think of the early Doom games, which is no bad thing. I love the pixel art in the 3D environment, and everything gelled together very cohesively. I love the animations on the enemies, and also the variety of enemies in the game too. I especially liked the kick animation of the player, when clicking the right mouse button. The game music was great, and I adored the voice clips of the enemies when they spotted me. The gun sound effects were fitting, and I didn't notice anything that I felt was missing. The gameplay was fast and frantic. I didn't like how you couldn't move the crosshairs up and down, as I would have loved to have been able to score headshots for more damage and high score points. The minimap was a great addition, but due to the game's fast-paced nature, and the fact that enemies seemed to be always on top of me, I couldn't look at it for any length of time to be useful without eating bullets. I also don't really like the option to buy health and upgrade weapons mid-game. I don't feel like I had a chance to properly decide if buying an upgraded weapon was worth it in the moment, or whether I'd be better off waiting until I'd save more money. I think having a weapon upgrade screen between waves would be a much better option, so I could take a moment to evaluate what to spend my cash on. You could also perhaps give a hint on this screen as to the enemies coming up in the next wave, so I could decide if my current weapon was enough. It's a fun game on one player, and I would imagine it's even more fun with two players, considering the satisfaction you'd gain sending extra enemies to your opponents. If you're lucky enough to have someone you'd call a friend, perhaps give it a play when you next get a chance.